Welcome to the Legends of Land podcast. Today, my friends, we have Matthew James at Land Dev Matt on Twitter. You've probably seen him walking around some of his development projects, and I'm excited for this conversation with Matt today. Matt, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just getting started here, in your Twitter bio, it says that some of your main interests are land, finance, and time freedom. What sticks out to you about those things?
I think everything is centered around time freedom. I remember about 8 years ago, I was 26 and I was working like 80 hours a week and made a very conscious decision. That wasn't the life I wanted to lead for the rest of my life. And more or less just made a very absolute decision that everything else that I did in the workspace, no matter what it was, would be directed towards early retirement and spending my time how I want to. Not necessarily, retirement's a loaded term. I don't necessarily mean not working, but more getting to that point where I can make the decision to spend my time how I want. So that's what's behind time freedom, and everything else funnels from that.
And was there some sort of thing that happened in your life where you just were fed up with work and you're like, I have to find a way to enjoy what I'm doing? Or what was that? Was there a decision point there, or was it just naturally built up over time?
I think it was built up over time. So at the time, I used to work for a very large, one of the largest commercial builders on the planet, actually. I was working on Disney projects for this general contractor. It's not Disney itself. I was, I worked for this general contractor that built part of the theme park, right? So I was on Avatar Land. I was on an expansion of Animal Kingdom in Orlando, doing resorts, all kinds of stuff for Universal and for Disney. And those kind of jobs require a lot. And I made it to project manager on Coronado Springs Destino Tower. If you're not familiar with that, if you watched the NBA in 2020 when they were in the bubble and all the NBA guys had to stay in a resort, it was the Destino Tower. So that was my grand climbing of the ladder up to managing that tower with several other folks. And it got very stressful. It was very, very time consuming, not necessarily from the 40, 45, 50 hours a week, but leaving the house at 5:30 in the morning, leaving work at 7:30, and the culture wasn't necessarily something that I saw myself in for the long haul. And so from there, I realized that I wanted to figure out how to make passive income. And then naturally, like most people, I know everybody always has the same beginnings. They either go to Robert Kiyosaki's book or Bigger Pockets or whatever it was. And for me, it was Bigger Pockets. I remember finding one of those like silly how-to articles, and there was like 10 ways to make income on the side, and one of them was passive income through real estate. And then never looked back. So devoured everything on Bigger Pockets, started learning about flipping, wholesaling homes, got very heavy into that before I actually found my way to land.
Actually, it's something you mentioned on your Twitter. You said you got very heavy into flipping, wholesaling homes for 18 months and it just burned you out, didn't get you where you want to go. Talk about that journey versus what land flipping looks like and the difference between those two.
Yeah, sure. A little more context on the background to get there. When I left that job, I actually ended up going to a land development job for a few years. In the land development job, I was learning all about how to manage major subdivisions for the biggest builders in the nation, right? D.R. Horton, Pulte, Lennar, KB Homes, all these big builders. And my job was basically, all right, we have permits to go from 100 acres of pine forest to a fully developed subdivision that then gets built on by these guys. So learning that side of it for 3 years. In the background, what I was doing was I had a lot more time because now I was actually working 40 hours a week and I wasn't used to that. And my wife was a stay-at-home mom, so we had our first child, and that was the catalyst for quitting my job that had a lot of hours to one that had 40 hours. Was the baby was on the way, and I didn't want to be a father that was only around on the weekends. So as I went to that job, being able to be a father and do 40 hours a week was I had a lot of time on my hands outside of that, and I ended up, learning how to wholesale and flip homes. And so what ended up happening was during that time, I started making a lot of money on the side and somehow came up with the idea that making like 80 grand in 4 months would extrapolate into grand riches. So I ended up quitting my job in land development, going into flipping homes, wholesaling homes, taking a shot at some new construction. And that actually ended up going well financially simply because you always make your money on the front end, right? Just like we do in land. And the whole reason why I ended up stopping that was I had a second child on the way. I pushed the envelope a little too far of where I wanted to be with how much I was working. And there were some other factors in there with market timing and all kinds of stuff. And homes just like it's a very intricate animal, right, compared to land. So going back to the original question, compared to land, homes, you need to know, what the year the roof is, the year of the AC, the condition of the plumbing. Do you have aluminum wiring to the panel? Is the panel Florida Pacific, which needs to be replaced? There's all these little intricacies that you have to know, like the back of your hand. In land, it's three things. You have access, you have wetlands. If there's floodplains, it's just not as desirable, but not a big deal. It's There's like nothing to it. Is it well and septic, or is there utilities in the right of way? And just the simplicity of it just blew my mind. The other component to it, just so I guess that's one, the simplicity was incredible. Two was you're dealing with a demographic that they don't like dealing with realtors. They don't like dealing with MLS listings in the 55, 60 plus a lot of the time. So they welcome, for example, cold calls or mail, right? They welcome these marketing strategies a lot more than folks with homes do, because when it comes to homes, a lot of the times you don't have the age range varies, right? The demographics vary all over the place. Whereas with land, most of the time the demographic it tends to be a lot older when they're sitting on land for 20 years and they're like, all right, time to sell it. I'm ready to retire. I never built that home I wanted to build. So that was two. And then three was the competition was nowhere near as fierce as it is in homes. There's so much more pie in land. And it's funny, I chuckle to myself sometimes when I hear new land investors talk about, oh, the market's so competitive. I was like, if you haven't done homes, you have no idea. Like, don't ever
Mm-hmm.
say that again. You mean you probably in homes, you probably have to spend like 12 grand to make 15. And like in land, you can spend 5 grand and make 50. It's not comparable at all. And so that was the third one that kind of blew me away. And then the fourth one that really stuck out to me was just earnest money. That just is such a minor detail, but how in land it's not normalized to require earnest money on contracts. Just again, just blew my mind. I was like, how is this possible? Yeah, I guess long story short, same type of business, right? Homes, it's all marketing, but you just have to have a stronger, not a stronger, you have to have a more in depth knowledge to really succeed in that realm. Same marketing. Land just doesn't require as much, unless, of course, you're trying to expand to multiple states and all kinds of stuff. And each state, each region has their own little nuances. But for example, myself, I'm a Florida guy. I tried going out one time to North Carolina, did not enjoy that experience whatsoever. So I stick to Florida, and I know what I'm doing like the back of my hand all throughout Florida. So yeah, it's a no brainer. I'm surprised that it hasn't taken off quicker from people. They probably just don't know, but it's been fun for the last year.
I think that people don't realize that that you can do the same thing with land. I don't think people think the market is big enough. It seems like such a little niche, like buying and selling land. If you say you're a real estate agent or a house flipper, everyone gets it. You say I'm a land investor or I flip land, people are like, what is that? I don't even get it. It's not part of the
Yeah.
cultural zeitgeist almost. Like real estate doesn't mean land to a lot of people, which is funny.
Yeah, there's always that taboo of if you buy land, you have to sit on it for 10 years before you can actually make a profit on it. And so a road has to come through to develop it to increase the value, which is not the case at all. There are a lot of plays like that, but that's not what land investors are after. And I guess I should be thankful for that taboo simply because it allows us to do what we do.
Exactly. And I think that's probably a lot of it too, is that there's no real clear path to like getting rent off of land. People see a house and like, oh, people pay you rent and that's how you make money. It just like clicks a little bit better. When you just have a piece of dead land there, it takes, I shouldn't say dead land, but a piece of land there, it takes some creativity of how am I going to monetize this? Are going to flip, value add? Am I going to, who knows? I think that's
Yeah.
maybe some of the mental block for people.
Yeah.
I came from real estate too, and I was a real estate agent and flipped houses and did full rehabs, like full gutting houses and going in and redoing them. And it's just, like you said, 1,000 variables.
Nightmare.
You have roofs, you have,
It's a
you know,
nightmare. I
pest
hate dealing with
inspections. Like, oh my,
contractors.
Yeah,
Oh man, I was always
contractors.
hunting new. Yeah, I mean, we margins are always so thin, and if you're trying to get somebody off Google, they're going to charge you an arm and a leg, which ends up obliterating your margin. So then I'm always hunting for new guys at Home Depot or whatever it is, and those are the guys that show up but only do 97% of the job, and then they never show up to finish the last 3%. So then you're out there
Mhm.
trying to figure it out how to get it done. Oh man, it's a nightmare.
Yeah, I think you gotta be able to swing a hammer to fill in those gaps for sure,
Right.
because, yeah, I was lucky to have a buddy with a crew, and so, like, we were just out there putting in serious work, and it was
Yeah.
actually fun, but you can't do that. It's not sustainable, you know? So,
Yeah. It's
uh
hard to leverage your time in that area.
oh, 100%, yeah. So you talked about working on bigger development deals. Talk about some big lessons maybe that you learned on doing 100-acre projects for big home builders, and what are some of the main keys that overlap into what you're doing now?
Yeah, sure. So with my full-time job being a land development manager for these really large projects, so I have probably the biggest subdivision development right now that I'm managing over. It's in Apopka, Florida. It's just north of Orlando, and it's about 100 homes, and there's some three-story apartment buildings, two different phases of that. And so I'm out there. I have some videos as well on Twitter or X, I should say, walking around that development. And a lot of the experience that I have from doing that job, what serves me the best and what I do now on my side hustle is the sense of urgency, I would say. Of course, there's just knowledge around land, but it doesn't necessarily translate so much. It's translating knowledge from I don't know if this will come off the right way, but knowledge from like the MBAs, being on a high school basketball team, for example. The stuff that I'm handling on day-to-day basis with my job is so far out there. The paperwork, all that kind of stuff doesn't necessarily translate to what I do for land flipping and whatnot. It's more so the mentality, which I can demonstrate with a good example from the first land flip I ever did. I marketed to Polk County here in Florida, and I think I sent 6,000 mailers out. This was a year ago, almost exactly. And that mailer, I probably got, I don't know, out of 6,000, I got 0.5% response, so maybe 30 responses. One deal came back where my mail, it was funny, it actually offered like 63,000. And the guy talked himself down. I don't know why he had this figure in his mind, but he basically said, I will give you this parcel for, what was it? It was like, I'll give you this parcel for 48. He like instantly took off like $15,000. And I was like, so we got it signed. And the funny thing is looking back, he probably thought he was like, ah, I'm getting this sucker because there's a gas easement that ran through the property. And I don't think he was able to do anything with the parcel simply because one, the gas easement, but two, it was 4.98 acres. And the zoning required 5 acres to be buildable. So he probably ran into an issue where he was like, this isn't even buildable land. I'm going to get $50,000 for my land because this sucker doesn't realize it. So during due diligence, and because of my job actually, so actually two things. One, the sense of urgency, but two would be the networking and the connections I have in Florida. That's part of the reason why I stick to Florida is I doing what I do. I talk to a lot of people in planning and zoning departments. So I work with planning and zoning in Polk County extensively for my day-to-day job. So I called the head guy, right? Instead of going to like the typical person that picks up the phone as the technician that'll help you answer some questions and stuff. I know the director. So I called the director, said, hey, is there anything you can do to help me out with this? And he was like, yeah, let me take a quick look. And he found that it was actually a vested lot of record. So basically, it was still eligible to be built, but it required a letter from the county. And usually, you have to pay like the $250. They have to give you a formal thing. You have to wait 3 weeks. He just sent me a quick email and said, hey, you're good to go. It's a vested lot of record, blah, 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 blah. So that was awesome. And I was like, oh, it's buildable. And then I found the survey on the property records, and the survey was like directly off to the side. It was perfect. It was probably like 4.5 acres were buildable. And it took up half an acre. So it was not an issue at all. And that was one where in the beginning, I had the funds required to take it down myself. And I really wanted to because I had high conviction in it. And my wife wouldn't let me. She wanted more of the proof of concept first. And I think a lot of us investors run into that. So I said, all right, no problem. And at the time, I was very heavily involved in Pete Reese's forum on school, the land conquest. And so I was actually his first full cycle funding where he funded it and it closed. So he funded it for me. We did the half split on that. But going back to the original question of what translates from my original job, it's that always pushing, always finding those answers when it comes to dealing with my site contractors, right? I never take their answers at immediate face value. It's always pushing to find that next answer. Get somebody who's going to say yes, figure out a way around it. Don't give up. There's a lot of just testimony out there on all different kinds of land forums of how people have found another way. They gave up, the contract was canceled. They somehow figured out how to get it done and they got it done. And I think that's probably one of the big gaps that I see with folks that come in. Sometimes when you haven't had a lot of experience in life with just persevering through no matter what and just figuring it out no matter what and having that mentality, it's really easy to just going to throw in the towel on this one, throw in the towel on that one, contracts canceled. You can't really have to have that grit to make it as an entrepreneur. So I think that experience from just being a project manager day to day really translates well to having that grit on the entrepreneurial side. And then, yeah, the second one, my second answer would be the networking connections. Absolutely. Because that definitely helped on my first deal. Yeah.
I can see that networking. Actually, a lot of people, developers I've talked to, talk about their knowing people in the county or knowing the county and how it operates really well. What would you say to someone maybe who has a deal, a possible subdivision, or maybe they need to work with the county on something, but they're unfamiliar? What's the path to just continue to work on that and make it happen?
Yeah, sure. So if I want to make sure it's as specific as possible for anybody watching this. I'd probably say specific to minor subdivisions because major subdivisions would be a whole other beast, right? So not looking at it as a land flip, looking at it as something that you've vetted the county the county muni code. So usually step one on a minor subdivision, you're going through the land development code and you're checking if there is a section for minor subdivisions. And there usually always is. And they might call it something different, right? But they'll usually tell you how many lots you can split one greater parcel. And you have to usually meet a couple different requirements. First one being minimum lot size and second one being minimum road frontage. And then beyond that, it starts getting a little nuanced. But those are really the main two. So as long as you meet all that kind of stuff and you're looking at it, first step is call your planning and zoning department, hands down, always. You're going to get the technician that's on call. And usually the way I go about that is I'll have the muni code up, I'll have the section there, and I'll just confirm a few things. Hey, can I do a flag lot? Because usually that's not written in that minor subdivision section of the muni code. So I might be able to squeeze an extra parcel or something that doesn't have enough road frontage, but as a flag lot, it requires less road frontage. And just to define flag lot for people listening, in case you don't know what a flag lot is, if you got a square, instead of splitting it and you only have enough road frontage to do two lots, right? So you split it down the middle with a survey. Instead, you might do two and then have a little skinny run on the side that opens up to a bigger parcel in the back. And so now you have three lots instead of two. And it looks like a flag because it's basically the pole, the little skinny easement, and then the bigger section in the back. So that's usually one of my top questions I'll ask you about flag lots and just working through that technician, kind of forming that relationship. Because if it's something that you go through with, that you're going to make the purchase, it makes a lot of sense. You're going to be dealing with that department a lot. So just making sure you always got your best charismatic voice on and just being optimistic, happy. It's people can always sense a smile and how you speak, and it goes a long way. I find that a lot of folks will do a lot of favors for you without even knowing you, just based on your tone, your tonality on a call. So yeah, definitely calling planning and zoning first, getting really deep into that code, the muni code for that specific county, and also just leveraging knowledge online. So there's always forums out there. I mentioned Pete Reese's forum. X is a great place. There's a lot of folks there that are constantly talking about land, and it's not really even that big of a community. It's maybe like 10 to 15 of us, but everybody's got like thousands of followers. So that always stuck out to me is how going on there and talking to the 10 or 15 folks that are out there, or I get messages all the time asking me questions, and I'm always happy to answer whatever I can. There's a lot of people out there, and they're all very friendly and looking to help. So at the end of the day, we've only been doing this for a relatively short amount of time. So I still identify as a newbie.
When you're talking about the county and the planning department, how much leeway or how much play do you think is in the answers they give, how much they're willing to work with you? What's the difference between just looking at what's possible and just saying, here's what's possible versus coming up with creative solutions with the county? How much extra is there in that?
Yeah, sure. So in minor subdivisions, I would say none. In major subdivisions, I would say a lot. Simply because so major subdivisions usually qualify under something called a PUD, a planned urban development. And that is, you're working within the confines of zoning in major subdivisions, but there's a lot of politics involved in that. Right. The neighbor may say, I've got an issue with this when they show up to the commission hearing, and now you got to put a tan fence. This is a real example on one of my projects. You got to add a berm and landscaping and all kinds of stuff to appease the neighbors. The county may require that you save additional trees just because they want some existing trees, which creates issues for our grading when we're doing on site. There's all kinds of stuff that you work through with the folks in the county. In major subdivisions, it becomes those relationships really come into play because on the really big projects, they're out there, right? They're looking at everything. Whereas, like when it comes to minor subdivisions and everything, you're just dealing with like a staff level, a technician, someone that's going to help you understand the code. So it really is just that it's per the code. So there's really no leeway when it comes to those minor subdivisions because it's just by the book stuff. It's not really, for lack of better words, it's not really big enough for them to really care that much about to do favors for anybody. So yeah, it's minor subdividing really comes down to knowing what counties to pursue. 67 counties in Florida. I've called about 90% of those county offices to confirm and go through their Muni code on exactly how many lots I can do, what road frontage is required, all that kind of stuff. So I've learned what the best counties are and I target those. And that is probably one piece of information. I apologize to anybody listening to this that I won't share because that took me dozens and dozens of hours to find the best two counties in Florida. And I'll tell you, that's the process, right? Anybody who wants to do it, go and do it. But there are a couple counties in Florida that are just far outshine all the other counties and make minor subdivides a lot easier. And I'm working through my first one right now, which is pretty awesome. Bought it for 220, got the survey, just working through putting my platting package together, which includes some calls to the postmaster and a traffic engineer where I'm getting like an exemption letter from doing a traffic impact analysis. So there's some minor little things that you learn along the way. You just got to take the action and roll with it. But I bought it for 220, and once I split it, it's worth about probably 500. So that's a really good one. And because of that, I'm basically just all in on that county. I'm calling all those numbers myself as opposed to my team calling them just because there's probably a couple $1 million hiding in that list. So
That's interesting. Do you have any? Obviously, you don't want to talk about Florida. That's your stomping ground. What about states that are good targets for possible easy subdivides? And people obviously can
well,
touch the counties within those.
yeah. I can expand a little bit on Florida. So I only do Florida. On Florida, it really is. I personally think it's the best state. Always hear a lot of people that say they avoid Florida because it's so competitive, but it's competitive because the demand is unparalleled. There is no other state that's getting as much immigration in Florida. It's not even close. I think Texas is in second, and they're at like half of the immigration that Florida's getting. So the demand is just my active days on market, and this is with rejecting offers that would still make me money is probably 4 months for anything I buy and put on the MLS. And that's because I'm waiting for a good offer. And so that's through the roughest part of the year, which we just passed now. We're going in Q2, and Q1 is historically always the slowest kind of dead season. And I'm still averaging 4 months through everything. So I love Florida for that reason. I think the demand offsets any kind of competition. You just got to learn your area. You got to really know what you're doing and know your backyard. But when it comes to minor subdivides, I think that process really applies to any state because if you just start kind of indiscriminately going after subdivides, you will have, I'm going to go about this two ways. You can indiscriminately go after minor subdivides in states that tend to be very lax about their rules. Texas is the perfect example. Most minor subdividers are in Texas because it's a statewide regulation that allows you to be plat exempt at over 10 acres. So basically, they don't have to worry about county regulations over there. You just have to learn the nuances as to does this area qualify for additional water taps and stuff like that. Texas is its own animal, but when it comes to the regulation side, it's the most lax in the country. So any subdivided course and all that kind of stuff, usually it'll be based with a person teaching you what they've learned from doing it out in Texas. I've seen other investors that have had some success doing it in North Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, areas like that, but you're not doing the big 100-acre, 200-acre split into 1 or 5 acre lots or 10-acre lots and stuff like that. It's usually like a 50-acre, maybe a 70-acre, and you split it into 3 or 4 pieces because in those areas you have a lot more topographical concern. And so you tend to be following lines, and you can only reasonably, you don't, because of the topography, you don't really have the best road frontage a lot of the time. It's not flat like Florida or flat like Texas where you have a bunch of squares everywhere. The roads are always meandering through the mountains, so naturally that reflected in the boundary lines. So you don't get those massive economies of scale of being able to split into 100 different lots. But those areas tend to have lax regulations as well, where you can do 10 lots or whatever it is on something and they don't require much, but you have some additional requirements when it comes to percolation testing. Soils is massive in the southeast. That's, if you operate in the southeast, everything that's like the great filter. Will it perk? That's the other reason why I love Florida. I don't worry about perk at all. I don't even think about it because Florida is sandy soils and there's a massive aquifer, and I you can get a well anywhere in Florida very easily, and all of that sand percolates incredibly well. The only time it doesn't is if you're majority wetlands, but that's its own filter in itself. If you have a majority wetlands on a property, it's probably not a good property, and people tend to avoid it. Yeah, I think it's just the same approach when it comes to minor subdivides. You call that planning and zoning department. You talk with the technician. You pull up the Muni code, and usually you can just Google county name, blah blah blah, state Muni code, land development code, or Muni code, and on your top links, you'll end up finding that land development section for subdivisions. You can type in minor subdivision or whatever they call it, and have that pulled up. Read it a few times through before you call planning and zoning department and figure out who has the most lax regulations. And a lot of the times that just comes down to having an Excel sheet and you're calling all these different counties and you're just trying to figure out what county allows you to split the most for the smallest piece of land without qualifying as a major subdivision, right? You're trying to toe that threshold. But that's really the process anyway. It's just you're going to get far better answers doing it in North Carolina, right? Most counties there are like between 7 to 12 parcels and up, and you still qualify as a minor subdivision. But in Florida, it's you can only split it once. We don't care if it's 100 acres. If you want to be a minor subdivision, you only have 250s. That's it, right? So Florida is really unfriendly when it comes to that stuff. So it takes, when I say dozens of hours to vet through every county in Florida, especially because a lot of times they don't pick up, or this is going to be any state, but they don't pick up. They don't know what you're talking about, and you got to find another technician. It's a hassle, but once you do all the work, it ends up being worth it. But yeah, that would be my recommendation on what that process looks like. How you get started is you find the most lax counties, and then you specifically target for that. It's far and few between that I see larger minor subdivides come through a typical land flipping funnel. It's not unheard of. I've definitely seen guys with stuff like that, and I've had some potentials come through my system as well. But there's so much money in minor subdivides that it's well worth the effort to have it as its own standalone marketing effort.
Do you think someone can build a business around just flipping and minor subdivides, or do you think it's, if you were transitioning full time, it's necessary to look at those bigger ones, the larger ones too?
If I was going full time, that's a whole other conversation in itself that I'd love to have. Why I still have a W-2, that's probably my top question, I guess. But
Let's talk about that.
yeah, going into that last question, looking at my operation specifically, land flipping, my marketing costs are probably, I'm not a massive operation by any means, but I'm definitely well established. I'm probably between, I don't know, 8 to 10,000 a month, call it, in marketing costs. And that's my full operation. That's everything. That's CRMs and all my cold callers. I have 6 cold callers in house, and right now I'm ramping that up. And we can go into marketing, preferred marketing strategies, and all that kind of stuff. But covering all of that, my land flipping business probably makes it at least covers that, but is trending towards doubling. At 10,000, let's say I'm spending 100 or 120, I'm probably profiting just as much over the year on that. So the minor subdivides are where the money is really at. And that's where we can expand on. People see all the best deals when it comes to the grandeur, what gets talked about on online and on social media. And it's the Instagram effect. It's the X effect. Everybody talks about their great deals or whatever it is. And that's a mistake I made when I was flipping homes and I made 80 grand in 4 months and thought I could quit my job and it would extrapolate. It doesn't really work that way. There's ebbs and flows and you have to plan for that. Because December, for example, I literally had last December, I made 100 grand off of land flipping. But then I had 3 months where nothing comes in, and now I have another 60 coming in this month. It's That's just how the business works. And so it's a matter of just understanding that you're building a pipeline. And when it comes to land flipping and subdividing, you could absolutely just have a business focused on subdividing. I think that would probably be the leanest, cleanest way to operate if you have funds and you're trying to do this on the side. Land flipping is, you're building a business, you're building a marketing business with employees. If you really want to have something scale to where you're making 100, 200 grand a month and more, I know guys that are making way more than that, but they're in it full time, a lot of employees, and they're crushing it. We have an unprecedented opportunity here just due to the lack of competition. And I think doing both is a natural avenue for anyone who builds a land flipping business, is to get into subdividing. But I also think there's a very possible route towards just doing minor subdividing as well. I've seen folks that are doing that in Texas, and that's all they go after. So yeah, I think both are very feasible. It just depends on your time constraints, which you can handle as a person. Yeah,
What do you think about flipping as a standalone business, not even doing the minor subdivides?
absolutely possible. It's a lot more work, but you pick your poison. Where when I initially started out in land flipping, I said I wasn't going to do anything under 2 acres, and that really helped me to this day. I've only done 6 land flips. That's it in a year. But those numbers that I was quoting with my marketing and how much I'm making, that's off of just 6 deals. And that's simply because 2 acres, I need to provide some context to this. 2 acres and up in North Carolina doesn't make sense, because 2 acres in North Carolina probably trades for 10, 15 grand, maybe 20 grand or something, depending where it's
Hmm.
at. When you're in Florida, in December, I had a 1.25 acre parcel that I bought for 43 and I sold for 130 10 days later. So you're the demand really affects your retail values. So when I say 2 acres and up, it's because I'm talking about retail values that average anywhere between, my typical bread and butter is anything that retails between 75 to 150. So that's like the playground I play in. I try not to go under that, simply because, as everybody says, same amount of work, same amount of effort, you're putting in the same amount of time, and you're not reaping nearly as much. So I always think it's a fallacy when I see folks that are focusing on these counties that just have tons of vacant land all over the place, and each one is a quarter acre that trades infill, vacant land infill that trades at 6,000, and they're trying to buy it for cash at 2,000 and sell it for. I think that's a complete waste of time unless you lack funds. If you lack funds and that's the only way you can get started, then 100% crush it. But once you start building up funds, I would absolutely make an effort towards marketing towards bigger properties. As a standalone business, absolutely. Again, we there's not an insane amount of competition in this. You just have to have that entrepreneurial mindset, and you have to be willing to constantly iterate. Right? If you set up a system and you have an operation in place, every single week, every 2 weeks, whatever it is, you're always iterating. You're always iterating. You're always trying to tweak and get better and get better. And that's just the nature of the beast.
And you mentioned if someone doesn't have funds, there's also a lot of money out there for if you have a good deal. Like you mentioned, partner with Pete program, and there's plenty of
Yeah,
places to get money. Do you think a avenue for someone to just get started is look for those $100,000 flips, and if they find one, partner?
absolutely. With the partner with Pete program, you don't even have to worry about like the disposition side. And just to define dispositions for any new investors, it's basically your selling side, right? It's a two-part business. You have acquisitions, you have dispositions. Acquisitions, everything to acquire the property. Your marketing, your acquisitions manager, or yourself, who's actually having a call with the seller and then routing everything through title, taking everything down. But then the back end, once you actually have that in your inventory and actually selling it, listing it, putting it on Facebook Marketplace, whatever it is, whatever avenues you're using to sell the property, that's your disposition side. The partner with Pete program, Pete Reese, he handles all of that. So he has realtors everywhere, and he handles getting them paid for photos and all that kind of stuff, and handles all of the negotiations and everything. So you're just focusing on acquisitions. I think it's a great program. I always recommend it because that's how I started on my first one. But after you build up some momentum, you've got cash, you can meet with private lenders. That's a whole new avenue that can really put some like rocket fuel on your business, and not being afraid to put yourself out there to meet those people, because it won't just pop on your lap, right? If you start looking for private money on Google, you're going to get a million links to these funds that aren't really what you're looking for. These are land specific private lenders that on average can lend out at 2% a month. So if you're buying a property for 30,000, let's say, There might be a $500 fee for all the paperwork and stuff, and then you're paying $600 a month. And if you have an average 6 month hold time before you expect to sell it, however you underwrite it, you're talking about 600 times six, $3,600 plus the fee. You're a little over $4,000. But ideally, if you're buying something that's worth 30,000, retailing at 60, there's a nice margin in there for you. So that's private money is a thing of beauty. And the way I found my private lenders was literally just talking about what I do for the past year, and people just reach out because folks that know land know that how easy it is to find land at 50% of retail or lower. And there's nothing safer than parking your money into a piece of land that is worth twice what you're lending out at. They're underwritten well and they're happy. You don't make payments, all right, it's their land now at half price. They got it now, so they feel protected. And I think it's as long as you're a good operator and you know what you're doing, it's just amazing to be able to leverage that. In homes, that's like unheard of. In
Hmm.
homes, you gotta put down an absurd amount of money. You have to do draws for your subs and float cash for them because those never come in time. It's a mess. But on land, it's
Talk a little bit more about those private lender deals. Are these people that you would find in? It's if you throw a deal out there online, like you're saying, or in there's a lot of land groups out there. You throw a deal out there, you'll have a lot of almost land investors who are real savvy, and they'll want
yeah,
30% of the
yeah,
profit or something like that. But you're talking about deals that are just an interest rate and so I think that a lot of people don't realize that those better terms exist. And so are you finding those in land groups specifically, or just like you're
yeah.
calling or okay.
Literally
Okay.
just posting what I do on forums and
Hmm.
posting on X. I've had folks reach out to me and I'm actively using them as lending funds. And it's just a matter of, you know, talk about what you're doing. Just don't be afraid to talk about what you're doing because it really comes down to your resume. Those
Hmm.
private lenders want to know that you have success in doing this. So that's why I say, as a first deal, this isn't really feasible unless you have a mom or dad or an uncle with a lot of money and you can leverage something like that. But for most of us, we got to go with the traditional 50-50 split because we don't have a track record. But once you built that track record, these guys see what you're doing. Because a lot of the times they're not really underwriting or doing the due diligence, probably doing something brief, but they're really relying on you and they're looking for experienced investors to lend out to. So this is by no means like a first deal base. But yeah, it's a lot of the times I try to I talk to a lot of newer investors as well. And I always try to get them to zoom out when it comes to like time frame. Everybody's always looking for how can I make 20 grand in 2 months or 3 months, or whatever it is. Like, well, start thinking about it as try to make 20 grand this year,
Hmm.
build a process in place, do it on the side. And this might be a good segue into why I'm a massive proponent into keeping your W-2 and not quitting right away, simply because of my experience with doing it on the home side. Even though I did well financially, having not having the W-2 back then, it really comes down to one thing where you have your living expenses and then you have your business expenses. But most of the time, you may have these separated, but in your mind, you really combine these as this is how much money I have to survive. And when you're thinking like that, you really start thinking in terms of how many months do I have left to live? Like, how long can I float a mortgage payment and living expenses for my wife and my kids and all this kind of stuff? And of course, I'm talking about folks that have a family to support. Whereas if you're in your 20s or something like that and you're living in a dorm room, like, crush it. You guys are in the best position
Hmm.
possible. Get out there. Don't make any more excuses. Let's go. But when you have more obligations to cater to, nothing can replace the security of that W-2, because what I found when I was wholesaling and flipping homes was those two buckets I always meshed into one mentally. I got 8 months left to survive, and my mentality was always that I don't know if I really want to spend 5 grand or 10 grand on marketing, because now I'm losing 2 months of time and now I have to wait on stuff, and that deal that whatever I spend 10 grand on I might not realize for another 12 months, so it doesn't work for cash flow. So in those kind of instances, I was never making the best business decision because it was muddied waters. So when you have the W-2 and the W-2 covers your living expenses, your business expenses are your business expenses, and you're truly like, okay, I have money for marketing. I can see my cash flow path. Everything works out perfectly. But to caveat that, you have to be an insane hustler. You can't. There's no excuses. I have a little David Goggins on my shoulder that He's always screaming in my ear saying, "Who's going to carry the boats?" Yeah, I work on land from 2 to 6 o'clock in the morning every day, 7 days a week for the last year. I think I've taken 2 days off.
Savage. Savage. I love that.
Yeah.
So you're working from 2 to 6 in the morning. When are you sleeping? 10 to 2?
From eight to 1:30.
Okay.
Yeah.
8 to 1:30. Okay. Wow. That's a heck of a schedule. So what's the rest of your schedule look like?
So 8 to 1:30, I sleep, wake up. So I have two kids. I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and we our sleeping situation is that we co-sleep. So I'm with my daughter till 1:30, and then we switch, and then I got the baby later on. And so between bottles, I'm on the laptop doing everything I got to do and getting the team set up because I have all my employees that handle all the day to day while I'm in the W-2. So the other caveat to that is if you're trying to do this on the side, you have to immediately leverage other people's team because you have to make the realization that I do not have time, and time is the utmost important variable that I need to leverage. So you have to have money in place to build a team and use their time, and that comes with $4 an hour VAs overseas that you're training and you're getting set up, and it takes time. But yeah, I got I believe 7 now. I might have just taken on my 8th actually. But I've got cold callers, acquisition managers, a lead VA that kind of runs everything for me. And then I'm just catching up on everything every single day and making sure that they've got enough pipeline to keep doing what they do for me. But yeah, so then 2 to 6, I'm taking care of all that between bottles. Then around 6, he starts shuffling around too much for me to be able to do anything. Getting ready for work. I work till about do all the kids stuff to get them out to preschool and breakfast for everybody and all that stuff, and then go to my W-2, work till 5, get home at 5:30, do all the kids baths, dinner, and everything till about 7:30. Hop in bed, go to sleep at 8 every day. So it's all I have time for is work and family. That's
I'm glad I got you on the podcast. It's awesome.
it.
Thanks for making time for all of everyone that gets to hear this. Let's hop into your ops a little bit because that's something that's really interesting to me. I love building
Sure.
teams and the whole building those systems around that. Let's start with cold callers since I'm interested in cold callers. I got a call center. You said you have 6 cold callers. How does that work? How do you monitor them? What call system do you use?
I use a data tree, like probably most other land investors. I'm on an annual plan with them. Get everything skip traced. I use Mojo Dialer as my main dialer. They all have their own accounts. I have a lead VA. So my lead VA that I've trained and I've had with me for a long time. She was actually my VA back when I was on the home side. And I really lucked out with her. She's a massive reason for my success in this last year. And that's because not only is she just a badass in general, but she was a supervisor that had 20, 30 folks under her in the cubicle farms over in the Philippines. And I basically have trained VAs on tap because of her. So whenever I need another one, I don't have to do the whole submit a video, review 100 videos, and all that kind of stuff. She knows who her best people were, and she vouches for me that I pay way better. I give bonuses on every closing, commissions, depending on tenure. I raise their pay. Um, I do everything I can to make sure they're as happy as possible. And yeah, I give her a bonus as well every time she brings over another VA that is a good fit. And yeah, I make sure they're all compensated on doing well. So it's been really nice to have her as my lead VA. But so she basically runs as far as managing the call recordings, checking to make sure everybody is doing what they need to do per the script, mainly for the newer folks. Everybody's hitting their time, reports. She gets a report out to me and we talk. We have 2 meetings a week where I go through just high level stuff with her. Yeah, she's definitely my fulcrum to my business. I'm very appreciative of her. And I think everybody else, when you're building out an operation system, that first VA is everything. You really want to have a strong VA that you really pour a lot of time into. Maybe it's not the first one you get. Maybe they stay in the cold calling place and then you put it and bring on a second and you realize that they're after it and they're hustling and they have that experience, whoever it is, but always keeping an eye out for that early indicator of someone that has that extra something because they can really pour the gas on your fire. So,
Yeah, and I'd throw
uh,
out there for people talk about hiring VAs, and it's always I want to, and what I tell people is go ahead and do it. A lot of it's not even about hiring a VA. A lot of it's about learning how to delegate to a VA and how to effectively communicate and how to make it so they're not taking more of your time than they're then they're providing value, because that's a skill in itself. And so the earlier people get started hiring global talent, working with someone remotely, project managing, like getting reports back, like all of that is such a nuanced skill that takes a long time to develop. I wish I would have just pulled the trigger. I thought about hiring global talent for 5 years before I finally pulled the trigger, because I wasn't sure quite how to do it. And then once I did it, oh, okay, like now I'm starting to actually learn how to do this. And same thing as you, I have a VA who's been with me going on 3 years now, and just absolute all star, has been through multiple business pivots and with me, and just is the heart of a lot of what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would totally echo that. So if you've got 6 cold callers, how much data might they call through in a month?
So this gets a little nuanced based on the type of dialer you're using, because a lot of the time in the industry, you'll see a single line dialer versus triple line dialer. I find that most people in the industry use a triple line dialer. I like to use a single line dialer. I avoid triple line at all costs, in my opinion. I find that every time I see KPIs on triple line versus single line, you still get the same amount of interested parties that want to sell per day at a fraction of the amount of calls they're able to make. And one of the main things I think you can attribute that to is when people get that message, your cold caller might be on the line with one person, but then as the dialer is dialing in the background, line two, three, whatever it is, however many they're working on, right? People answer, they get a message, they hang up, they mark it as spam, and like they're out as because they didn't hear that voice. So sometimes I find the total amount of dials made on a triple line dialer is like these really high numbers, like 12,000, whatever it is, something like that. I would implore that anyone that is actively doing that, just pull one of your callers off and just have them on a single line dialer and just compare it. Just see it for yourself. Just you're really not risking anything by doing that. And yeah, you can drastically reduce your records and skip tracing cost just because it goes so much further on a single line dialer. And again, the massive KPI that stuck out to me that made me a massive proponent of that is that I am getting the same amount of interested parties as someone using a triple line dialer in the same area, same everything.
And what would you say, how many leads might you get a day for?
Probably anywhere between, I'm trying to think because it's going to be a convoluted answer simply because I have one of my cold callers that I pulled off for record scrubbing.
Mhm.
And I'm just trying to think of my latest data. And I have another one that I pulled off for a side project. So it's probably based on like 4 cold caller numbers. And I would say each one of them, they're dialing, I want to say each one of them gets at least 1 point per day, maybe 1.5, 1 to 1.5, somewhere in that range per day. So on like the four right now, I'm probably getting between five, six, somewhere in that range a day at the moment.
Nice.
The metric that I like to use, because like seller interest is the same as like a neutral letter. I don't
Yeah.
necessarily like to use that as like too much of a measuring indicator. What I find my main indicators is that each cold caller, if they are dialing 40 hours a week, each cold caller's efforts usually lead to a contract that I actually close on every 6 weeks.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
on 6 cold callers full time, you should be averaging, one deal that you're closing on every week.
That sounds similar to what we've got going on. We say 4 to 6 weeks per cold caller for a deal,
Yeah.
which is sounds about right. The outbound call volume is similar. I think that what you're saying about the single dialer versus the multi dialer is interesting. What does How much do you measure their, how often do you listen to their quality assurance? How important do you think the script they're using is, and how much they stick to the script? Or do you think it's just, if someone's willing to answer the phone and talk and they give you their information, it's as good as a lead? What do you think on that?
Yeah, so I structure my business a little bit different from folks I talk to. And I see a lot of people that have, again, tremendous success with having that incredibly dialed in. My process is very different simply because my time comes at a premium with a full time job. These are people that are coming from a place of having all day to trying to dial in on that stuff. I'm trying to have the same amount of success living and dying by Pareto's law. So where 20% of my effort gets 80% of the results. And I found that it works. So I'm ruthless when it comes to cutting out stuff that I think doesn't matter and just focusing in on the absolute necessary qualities of a process. And so with that, I had 3 different versions of a script, and I said, screw this. They hop on the phone and they introduce themselves with more or less like a kind of a casual statement of poking fun at the fact that they're a virtual assistant. Hey, is this such and such the same opener? Because you want to make sure you're talking to the right person. Is this the person that owns this parcel of land? They're like, yeah. And they're like, I'm sorry to bother you with another call from the Philippines, like something silly like that.
Yeah. Okay.
And that gets their attention. And it's something like that because all the time, like all of these people are usually getting calls from somebody that, like, oh, you're the owner of this. Are you interested in selling? So once I get that and they say, yes, they're interested in selling, really all I care about is, do they have a price in mind? Do they not? And that's it. Because I find a lot of people, they kill the atmosphere of the call by going into, can you tell me more about it? When's the last time you were there? Is there a power pole nearby? Tell me about access, because it's really easy for us as land investors to review everything on id.land, just figure all that out in 5 minutes per lead, right?
Yeah.
So if either you can do it yourself or you have an underwriter that specializes in that. But because of that, I try to make sure that we're always leaving the seller in a positive mindset, that like they smiled while they were on the call. We kept it really short, respectful of their time, and we're going to get right back in touch with you here with an offer. And of course, most of the time, 99% of the time, they're going to tell me to go screw myself on the offer because we're obviously trying to get great deals. But nevertheless, the one that says yes, that has that positive mindset, and again, when they're in that mindset, they're more likely to actually answer the next time we call and follow up because I have that positive connotation. So yeah, I'm very loose on the script. As long as it's like that and they're interested in selling, do they have a price in mind? Yes or no? And that's it. That's all I care about. And I think that's all you really need to care about, going back to that Pareto's law mindset.
I think that's pretty sharp, actually. It's some output based thinking, and I think that you're incentivizing measurables because you're paying them on closes, so they're naturally incentivized to do their best and close deals. They're almost a little bit on commission based. It sounds.
Yeah. So my cold callers aren't the closers. They just call, gauge seller interest, and move on. Then I have someone that they basically imported. I use Pebble as my CRM. They imported into Pebble. They do all of the preliminary underwriting for me, and then my acquisitions manager takes it from there and gives them an offer. And then I'm like the last check, where if they're actually interested in the offer given, I'm doing all my final checks, making sure no stone is left unturned, and taking it from there and doing all the transaction coordination and everything, because that's all I really have time for, right? So I'm keeping the funnel fed with data, touching base with my acquisitions manager on any kind of high level calls, any deals that are really coming to fruition, and then just doing any transaction coordination through emails and working on my minor subdivide and all the background stuff. There's always background stuff. We just passed tax day, working on taxes and
Mhm.
whatever you got to do, onboarding a new caller and getting them set up on the back end with a new account in Mojo, and new email, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's mainly my focus. Knowing I have limited time, I just got to be really choosy about how I spend it.
I think how you're managing that with the outputs is a great way to do it. I shout out to John. I think it's John Seffer. I know he's connected with John Matzner on Twitter, but he had that book that he recently launched, Output Thinking. But it lines up a lot with how you're operating. Instead of micromanaging all the details, what is the end goal, and then managing that end goal and having KPIs around that is great. I also like the kind of classic pattern interrupt that you're using there with another call from someone from the Philippines. I think anything that bumps people off of that just standard cold call, anything that shifts them out of that just thing they've done 100 times is a great move. I like that. And there was something that I like that you're looking for. Do you have a price in mind? And then the other thing that I think is interesting to ask, is there some sort of motivation? I like to ask, if why are you thinking of selling it? What's going on? Or what were your plans for the property? Those type of
Sure.
questions that are conversational and maybe give you a little bit of information about what's going on in their life. Are they looking to sell this quick because their daughter's getting married in 3 months, or if
Yeah.
they have not been out to it in 20 years? So you're acquisitions manager a little bit. I know that's probably an important role.
Yeah.
Where are they from, and like how'd you find that position? How do they do it?
Yeah. So someone listening to this may think that I got lucky in several regards, and I would agree with him. Going back to my lead VA, and my acquisitions manager came from a connection with a broker that I worked with on the flipping and wholesaling side. And this guy lives in Nicaragua. He used to live in California, so he doesn't have an accent, but moved to Nicaragua. And there's obviously a difference in conversion rate over there. So I pay him like 15 bucks an hour and a commission for every deal that closes. And I have him, I only need him for a few hours a day. So that's another kind of tip that I would give to anybody starting out is most people that are reluctant to get a VA, usually they're like, they think they have to hire the VA like full time all day, every day. You really don't. If you only need them for 3 hours, hire them for 3 hours a day and go from there. You can always tailor down, you can scale up. I used to have him at 2 hours a day. Now I have him at 3 hours a day just because the volume's going up. But he's been doing a great job. He's got that sales background coming from the broker side and that the broker that he used to work with. So I was able to leverage all of his training and everything from the years that he had with that guy. So I think I got pretty lucky there with connections again, network and the connections. And I've been in the real estate space here in Florida for a while.
Those win situations are just where people can crush it with global talent. If he's living in Nicaragua, you pay him 15 bucks an hour. He works 3 hours plus commission. He's making great money and he's working 3 hours a day. He's probably pumped. Maybe he has
Yeah.
another job. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's just
Yeah.
enjoying life at the beach. So that's
Yeah.
cool. What's his commission structure look like? And how do you incentivize that properly? Do you base it on the purchase price, the pipeline profit, or is it just per deal? What's that look like?
No, I literally just have a flat structure of just 200 bucks a contract, and he was happy. I asked him what he was looking for, and that's what he said. And I said, "Done deal. Let's go."
Yeah, that's rad. That's like a few days pay or couple weeks pay, it looks like. Yeah, so that's killer.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice, nice. Any other interesting caveats to add on the cold calling part of your operation there?
Yeah, I would say that some conversations that I was having with other investors about the kind of the best marketing channels, right? Because that always tends to be a conversation. And what I find is when you're a newer investor, you're really focused on what's the marketing channel I should start on. But as you hit critical mass to where you're flowing with an operation that's in place, you realize you're doing all of them. But even being in that seat now where I've done all the marketing and I have like a marketing schedule for mail and cold calling and texting and voicemails and whatever, all the different stuff. I still have a favorite and I'm really doubling down on it. And that would be cold calling. I stopped all mail. I don't do it at all anymore. And that's not to say that mail isn't worth it. I see a lot of people that are getting consistent flow from consistently mailing. The reason why I don't like it is just the time involved with getting it out and waiting between 1 to 4 or 5 months. The bulk of that coming in like month 2 or 3 from when you actually send the mail out. And there's of course the argument that there are people out there that will only respond to mail because your data may not be good and you can't reach them any other way. But the kind of the instantaneous aspect of calling, getting somebody on the phone and talking to them voice to voice is really powerful in my opinion. So I really think what separates smaller operations from the bigger operations is doing cold calling in-house if you can. A lot of the times we don't have the time to do that. So there's services, of course, yours. I'm getting started with offering something like that. I have one whole client right now, but I think it's going so far and we'll see. I'm probably going to ramp that up very slowly because again, my time is at a crazy premium. But I think that's where a lot of the power is. If this is something you really want to build out for years and years, zooming out, I really think there's no replacement for cold calling and having a lot of callers in house. That's something I would definitely recommend for somebody trying to break through and get to that next level.
Yeah, ping me as you build that out and ask, and we'll share tips and tricks because it's awesome. And it sounds like you're crushing it. I love cold calling because of the feedback loop that you mentioned, like the whole sending it out and then waiting 6 weeks to see if that market hit or having just this lumpy deal flow. And the other part about it that is very intriguing to me is the operationally, the ability to just if you have this lead channel with a quick feedback loop right on the front end that's just happening consistently, and those few leads per day are dropping into your CRM, let's say, it's easier to build processes and systems and have VAs and people who are just on a schedule where they do these same things every day when it's happening like that. When a bunch of leads are coming in one day and then none, and then you got to figure out the next mailer, the whole managing a team, building the processes and the operations on top of that lumpy deal flow becomes, to me, 80/20, just like you mentioned earlier, it just becomes more effective to just have the leads, quick feedback loop coming in every day, and then go from there, build from there. So,
That's a great
um,
point. Yeah, I never thought about it that way. That is a great point. Gives you a consistency in lead flow. Absolutely.
and so you've gone completely away from mailers, and you're now doing cold calling, and it looks like you're having a lot of success with that. That's awesome. Did you have anything else to add around the cold calling scene?
No, I don't think so. I think that was it.
Cool. We have talked about your subdivides, how you got into this, how you built your business, your W-2, how you think about that, the cold calling. Do you have any other kind of chunks of information that you want to talk about or anything you want to get into as we get into the last few minutes of the show here?
Land flipping, subdividing. No, I think we probably ran through it all.
We crushed it. I'm
Yeah.
sure I'll have you back on a few months from now, this year again at some point, and we'll see where you're at and how things have evolved, what's going on with your callers. And I had one more question. I have two more
Sure.
questions. The first question is, are all your callers remote, or do you have them in an office together?
No, they are all remote in the Philippines within. So there's kind of two trains of thought with that, where I've seen folks that really scale an outsourced cold calling operation where they will actually go over there with the intention of hiring 100 cold callers, right? That is their bread and butter. That's their main business. They're not necessarily going after land flipping. They're more so going for. Can you hear me? Oh, okay. Sorry, I had some weird beats. I didn't know. But am I losing you?
You're just going in and out. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's dying. Here, let me
Okay.
give me 1 second. Let's see if it works. If it doesn't, I'll disconnect it and I'll just go through the laptop audio.
Okay.
But really, two trains of thought here where I've seen folks that will go, for example, to the Philippines. They'll rent out an office and they'll basically they'll hire a manager in place to bring folks in. But that's with the intention of building a cold call center with 50 to 100 cold callers or more. And that's really their main bread and butter as opposed to focusing on the land flipping stuff. I'm approaching it from a different angle of not necessarily building it that way, but building it one person at a time. And so give them the flexibility of working out of their own home, their own laptop, all their own stuff. Again, it's Pareto's law. I don't really want to put on all that extra stress of finding a manager and flying over there and opening an office or anything or having anything to manage like that. It's really just having that really strong lead VA that holds them accountable for the recordings and the different things that they're doing, the KPIs, and making sure that they're hitting their amount of hours that they're supposed to call and they're doing what they're supposed to do. It's really what it comes down to. And then you really don't need that office or anything like that. You can just they can all operate on themselves. If they don't perform, then don't perform. And go on to the next one. So yeah, they're all in their own homes.
Beautiful. So, final two questions. One, if you could send one message out to Twitter, everyone on all of Twitter would see it. What would that message be? And then number two, where can people find you online?
One message that all of Twitter could see, it would be spend time with the people you love because time is the only thing that matters. That's it.
Beautiful.
And then where they can find me is definitely on X at LandDev Matt LandDevMat.
Land Dev Matthew James, absolute pleasure to meet you, talk to you today, and I look forward to your next time on the podcast.
Awesome, thank you.